Joining me from the Cuba Opportunity Summit at the NASDAQ is Mark Entwistle, former Canadian ambassador to Cuba, and also you have your own firm, Acasta Capital. Good to see you.
Likewise.
You have said many times it is a long process toward normalizing relations between U.S. and Cuba. What's the biggest hurdle going to be from this point on?
There are a number of thorny issues that both sides have to get through. With the demonstration of political will, or a continued demonstration of political will that we've seen to date, I think anything's possible. The next immediate question is the removal of Cuba from the state-sponsored terrorism list, which in turn will open up a number of other possibilities in terms of financing and access to the international financial system.
Do you expect that will happen?
I do. Apparently the review is underway that the President asked for. From what I understand, most American foreign policy professionals believe that Cuba should come off that list. And I would be surprised if that was not the recommendation, but I don't know what it will be.
Of course, right. Now, even if Cuba is removed from that list, what about the issue of corruption?
Corruption in Cuba is a very particular Cuban variety, if I could say. The traditional corruption that we understand in the form of, for example, a brown manila envelope filled with $1 million to give to a minister of mines to get a mining concession does not exist in Cuba, at least anything in my experience. Cuban corruption is more in the sense of a systemic pilferage of stuff from the state. So if Cubans want to put an addition on their house, they wander down to the nearest construction site and grab a bag of cement and some cinder blocks. So there's a very, very low scale kind of criminalization of society. And in that sense, for foreign investors, for example, it is a planning element that exists in Cuba, and it's something that you have to plan for. But traditional corruption does not exist.
So businesses might have to prepare for, say, losses they don't expect?
I think that's something they should plan for. Because, of course, Cuba is a poor and developing country. So there is an asymmetrical relationship with incoming foreign capital. Cubans think we're all rich and everybody's rich and we won't notice the missing bag of cement. But it is a fact of doing business there that you probably need a night security guard around to make sure your bags of cement don't go missing. Yes.
What else should U.S. businesses think about as they approach potentially Cuba?
Well, there's all the normal array of commercial considerations, although I would argue that most of them are well considered in Cuba, and Cuba is actually quite a stable place. There's arbitration measures in place. They have a lot of experience in that. Remember, the Cubans have been doing business with foreign companies for a long time.
Right, it's just not the U.S.,
It's not, you know, there's a tendency in the United States to think that Cuba is an empty vessel now to be filled, whereas in fact it's a vessel already quite full in which American business will have to jump in and compete.
What sector do you think has the best chance for competing in Cuba against some of these other companies that are there?
I think the first immediate one that comes to mind would, of course, be all around the hospitality industry infrastructure. Simply the mass movement of Americans at some point in the future, and already the number of Americans traveling to Cuba is exponentially increased just since December almost. So the hotel industry, all the financial services around that, I think is an obvious kind of first step, although that requires investment, which according to the trade and investment embargo is not allowed. So ironically, foreign capital will probably work with Cuban partners to build out infrastructure to support American tourism. But American supply of goods and services, anywhere where transportation costs are an issue, U.S. business will have a competitive advantage and great brand recognition.
In terms of the trade embargo, do you think that that would have to be lifted? In other words, Congress would have to take action during the current presidential term. Is this an issue that potentially could go away after the presidential election, or is the movement too great right now?
I believe that one could deploy all the usual cliches. I do believe that this is fundamentally different. The train's left the station, you know, the cat's out of the bag, whatever, the genie's out of the bottle. I think a process is underway that is, many things can happen on the way and there may be all kinds of bumps in the road, but I think a historic process has been unleashed here that'd be very hard to stop. And I think it I think we're on a permanent path to some kind of different relationship.
Mark Entwistle, great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.